Hello, welcome to Tales in Minutes. Today we will be going through a 1994 horror romance film titled Interview with the Vampire. Spoilers ahead, watch out and enjoy. The movie opens in San Francisco as a man, Louis, narrates his life in an interview with a biographer. Louis claims to be a 200-year-old vampire, but the biographer does not believe. After showing the biographer a trick by putting on the light without actually touching the switch, the biographer is shocked and starts listening to Louis. Louis starts his narration as far back as 1791, when he was mortal and 24-year-old. The year he was born into darkness, as he calls it. Louis describes his life before then as gloomy as he searched for death and how to lose his wealth, estate and sanity because the pain of losing his wife while she was giving birth was unbearable. He goes to a tavern one night and wastes away his time with a whore while gambling. A fight ensues between the gambler and Louis, and the gambler threatens him with a gun, but Louis opens his chest, encouraging the gambler to shoot as he is in need of death. Everyone in the tavern is shocked by his actions and the gambler does not have the courage to shoot. Louis' invitation of death was open to all and accepted by a pimp and a vampire. Louis leaves the tavern with the whore and is followed by a pimp who demands for money. A vampire by name Lestat attacks them, killing the pimp and whore and feeding on Louis, leaving Louis drained on the banks of Mississippi with a slim chance of living. Lestat visits Louis later in his house, offering him a good life devoid of death, which Louis accepts and turns Louis into a vampire. Lestat teaches young vampire Louis the vampire necessities, how to sleep in a coffin, and how to feed on humans. Louis does the former perfectly, but due to his kind heart, he rather feeds on animals as he feels guilty about the latter, which is in sharp contrast to Lestat. One night, Lestat takes Louis to New Orleans for a treat. Lestat prefers the blood of a wicked rich snub, as he claims the blood of evildoers tastes better. They target an old woman, Mame St. Clair, who killed her husband and blamed it on her maid. Lestat kills the woman's slave, but Louis, who is meant to feed on the woman, kills and feeds on her two dogs instead, because he still has his humanity left in him. Shocked by what she is seeing, the woman screams and cries for help, but on hearing this, Lestat immediately comes and kills her. Louis and Lestat go on a killing spree while feeding on the blood of animals and humans respectively. Soon enough, Louis's slaves notice that he has been dining on empty plates since the arrival of his new friend, Lestat. They get worried and scared for their master. One of the slave girls go to talk to Louis and show concern about how everyone feels, but he loses control and feeds on her. Out of regret from what he has done, he frees all his slaves and sets his house ablaze while inside it. But Lestat arrives just in time to save him. Lestat tries to get Louis to feed on humans by inviting him to join him, while he, Lestat, is feeding on some whores, but Louis refuses while enduring the hunger. Louis goes out to the streets to feed on the blood of rats, and he finds a little girl named Claudia mourning her mother's death, and he feeds on her while comforting her, giving into the hunger. Lestat finds him and mocks him, reminding him to accept his new life and not feel guilty. But Louis runs away from Lestat, feeling extremely guilty about killing the little girl. Lestat finds Louis and tricks him into staying by giving the little girl Louis killed a new life, an immortal vampire life. Louis gets very attached to the little girl, Claudia, who Lestat calls his and Louis's daughter, and is pampered and made a Lestat breed fierce killer. As time passed and new worlds emerged, Claudia longed to grow, but her mind was trapped in the body of a little girl. Angry and seeking answers, Claudia confronts Lestat about who made her this way. Louis answers her questions, showing her how she was made a vampire. Claudia runs away with hatred for Lestat and Louis, especially for Lestat. Claudia goes back to Louis, her love, and proposes getting rid of Lestat, which is not an easy thing to do. She tries to kill Lestat using the disguise of making peace, tricking him into drinking the blood of a dead boy, which is poisonous to vampires. They dispose Lestat's body in a swamp and Louis books a boat to leave the city. But Lestat comes back and tries to kill his naughty child after feeding on the blood of a crocodile. In order to save Claudia, Louis sets Lestat on fire, running away with Claudia and catching the boat just before it leaves. Louis feels guilty about delivering Lestat into the hands of death the second time and is afraid that Lestat might come for revenge because he is unsure if Lestat is truly dead this time. Claudia and Louis feed on the passengers of the boat till they reach the Mediterranean, where they intend to find some answers about what they are, and others like them if possible. Louis searches for other vampires in many countries and towns and eventually gives up, but a vampire finds him and invites him to a theater ran by vampires in Paris after losing hope. He is invited to the theater, along with Claudia. At the theater, they watch a play acted by vampires and how brutally they kill a mortal in the play, earning the name Monsters from Louis. A man who later calls himself the leader takes them to an underground place where many vampires stay. Louis questions the leader, but he does not answer much of Louis's question. Louis and Claudia leave the underground place. Louis goes back to the leader to try to get more answers and finds out that Claudia's life is in danger because it is forbidden to make a child that young a vampire. Louis begs him to spare Claudia's life, but the leader gives Louis an option of sending Claudia away while he stays. But the leader wants him to stay. Louis leaves with a certain feeling of peace. Peace that he has always longed for, because he has found a teacher that can teach him about what he is more than Lestat did. He goes back to Claudia and Claudia persuades him into turning a new woman into a vampire to be her companion, since she senses she will soon not be with Louis anymore. Louis refuses, unsure of the woman's love for Claudia. Proven otherwise, he eventually gives in to her request and turns the woman into a vampire. Not long after, a group of vampires break into their house and capture all three of them. The vampires lock Louis in a coffin and bury him in the wall to suffer for eternity and keep Claudia and her new companion in a dungeon that is penetrable by sun rays. The leader frees Louis the next morning from the coffin and tells Louis not to go looking for Claudia. But Louis goes to look for Claudia only to find Claudia and her companion burned to ashes by the sun. Driven by rage and revenge, Louis set the vampires on fire while they're sleeping, burning the whole basement and killing all the vampires. He gets into a fight with one of the awakened vampires, which he easily defeats by cutting in half with a sickle. He leaves the place to burn to ashes and is almost burnt by the rising sun, but the leader saves him again, taking him to another building. Louis asks the leader why he didn't warn the vampires despite knowing what he would do, and the leader calls the vampires weak and filled with regret, and he, the leader, did not intend on saving them based on those flaws. He offers to teach Louis all the vampire attribute, inviting Louis to stay with him, but Louis opts to wallow in a life of regret, declining the leader's offer regretfully. Louis goes back to New Orleans in the spring of 1988. He picks a scent of Old Death, as he calls it, and walks down a street. He follows the scent behind a cemetery and finds a pale and malnourished Lestat in an old house. Lestat is pleased to see Louis and also afraid on the other hand. Louis talks Lestat out of his fear, and immediately a helicopter flashes light on them, making Lestat cover himself, greatly afraid of the light. Louis assures him that it is an artificial light and he won't be harmed by it. Lestat asks Louis to stay with him, but Louis refuses. Louis tells the biographer that all his passion and will has gone with Claudia. After hearing his captivating story, the biographer begs Louis to make him a vampire, but Louis refuses. The biographer begs some more and Louis strangles him. Louis lets go of the biographer and vanishes, and the biographer picks his things and runs out the room for his life. He plays the recording of Louis's life while driving away and is attacked by Lestat. Lestat sucks on his blood but promises to give him the choice he, Lestat, never had. A choice to choose the life of a vampire. Subscribe and turn on notification for more videos like this. Leave a like to help the channel grow, and don't forget to comment your favorite movie you would like us to recap. Until next time, do take care.